Everybody.
Let's start the Hyde Park 3. Let me tell you the timing. We are already 8 minutes late. It's 11 a.m. to 12:25. Let me quickly introduce moderator Dr. Sudipta Ghosh. Can you please take it over? Dr. Sudipta.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be on this platform. I would like to welcome our chairman, Dr. Aditya Niyok, our co-chairman, Dr. Minakshi Yadav Dhar, our convener, Dr. Sukanya Mitra, our co-convener, Dr. Ankur Sinha, and I'll be moderating the session. Dr. Aditya Niyok, kindly say a few words.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to my co-panelists, the presenters, and all the delegates for this Hyde Park 3 session. As we are already running late, let us start immediately with the presentations. I wish all the presenters good luck, and I would ask everybody to stick to their time, which is 4 minutes. And then if we have time subsequently, we'll discuss. Let us finish the presentations first.
Yes, Dr. Aditya, we have 1 minute for discussion, 4 minutes for speaking. Let's call the first speaker.
Sure.
So our first speaker is Dr. Siddhartha Sane.
Dr. Siddharth Sane, can you hear us?
I can hear you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Please share your screen.
I think I will request that we have the next speaker ready.
Yes, let me announce the next speaker, Dr. Anurag Narula. Please be ready.
Dr. Siddharth, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to share the screen. Just give me a moment.
From the next speaker onwards, when the discussion is going on, the next speaker can share the screen.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, ma'am. The 1 minute we have for discussion, the other speaker can actually start sharing the screen.
Ma'am, is the screen being shared right now?
Yes.
But not your presentation.
1 second.
Open your presentation.
I think you'll have to give the permission to the Zoom or the Chrome to allow access to your screen if you're using a Mac.
1 second, sir.
Till then, let me quickly announce that next Dr. Anurag and Dr. Dipti Tiwari, they are not here yet. If they hear, they can just raise voice. Dr. Upali is there. So I request Dr. Upali to please be ready after this.
Is the screen getting shared, sir?
Yes.
All right.
But not your people. Yeah, we can see PPT. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, AIOS, for giving me this opportunity to present my topic on the use of 5-fluorouracil in high-risk cases of glaucoma. Without any further ado, I'll start with the introduction. Glaucomatous eyes with previous failed filtration surgery, young patients, previous inflammation, neovascularization, previous intraocular surgery trauma are at high risk of failure of filtration surgeries. Adjunctive use of antimetabolites has been shown to inhibit wound healing and increase success rates in high-risk glaucoma filtration surgeries. Several studies having demonstrated that post-op subcunj injection of 5-FU was effective in minimizing scar formation and promoting success in filtration surgeries, but it was also fraught with complications like corneal epithelial defects, conjunctival wound leaks, and globe perforation. Various complications like these prompted a study to investigate the intraop use of 5-FU. A prospective comparative study of single intraop use of 5-FU in 40 patients of glaucoma who were at high risk of failure of filtration was conducted. Patients were divided into 2 groups, A and B, each consisting of 20 eyes. Group A was given a 5-FU in dose of 25 mg per ml and Group B 50 mg per ml. Pre-op all routine examinations were conducted and modified Kane's trabeculectomy was performed. The inclusion criteria included previous failed filtration surgery, congenital or juvenile glaucoma, pseudophakia or aphakia with glaucoma, uveitic glaucoma, traumatic glaucoma, and advanced angle closure or open angle glaucoma. A written informed consent was taken. The modified Kane's trabeculectomy was performed. After taking the rectangular scleral flap, a 4x4 mm cotton pledget soap in 5-FU was placed over scleral flap for 4 minutes and flap margins were kept away from pledgets. Copious irrigation with 30 ml Ringer's lactate solution was done. Post-operatively, the patient was given topical dexamethasone plus tobramycin 4 times a day. Follow-up visits were conducted on day 1, first week, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and 9 months post-operatively, and all relevant ocular examination were conducted. The criteria for success was divided in 3 groups. complete success, qualitative success, and failure. Complete success was defined as IOP less than 21 millimeters of mercury without anti-glaucoma medications, qualitative less than 21 with anti-glaucoma medications, and failure an IOP of more than 21 millimeters of mercury despite anti-glaucoma medications. The advantages of intra-op application of 5-FU over post-operative injection included less frequent patient visits, no risk of ocular perforation, no corneal epithelial defects, and decreased levels of patient discomfort. The success rate in this study with CS plus QS group of 85% in group B was found to be comparable with success rate of 73 to 96% in other studies. The IOP lowering effect in groups A and B was 53.2% and 56.7% respectively, which was found to be slightly higher than the 42% reduction as found in the study by Bell and others. No corneal complications were reported in either group in this study. No cases of hypotonia maculopathy were reported in this study, and no bleb leaks were reported in any case under study for a period of 1 year during follow-up. The only limitation was that the study period of 12 months was found to be inadequate to determine long-term success or late complications, as late bleb leaks and endophthalmitis might occur later. Non-sight-threatening complications like shallow AC was seen in 4 patients in group A and 5 in group B, but it was responsive to pressure patching, while hyphema was seen in 2 patients from group A, which resolved spontaneously. Concluding the study, it was found that the intraoperative use of 5-FU was found to be safer and more effective as compared to post-operative injection. 5-FU in the dose of 50 mg per ml was found to be more effective than the low dose of 25. However, 5-FU of high dose also showed a higher complication rate than the 5-FU of low dose 25 mg per ml. Following are the references for the study. Thank you, sir.
Well on time and well presented.
Thank you,
Dr.
ma'am.
Anurag. Dr. Siddharth Sane.
Yes, ma'am.
Our next speaker, Dr. Upali, wanted to get some time. And I guess Dr. Naredi just left the meet. So do we have Dr. Gariashi ready?
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I
Gariashi
in?
is ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. In the meanwhile, the next person can get, kind of prepared.
That's Dr. Shobik Badua.
Madam, am I in or no?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Ma'am, can I start?
Yes, please.
A very good morning to one and all attending today's session. Today, I shall be discussing the role of posterior sclerotomy and trabeculectomy in a post-trabeculotomy case of Sturge-Weber syndrome. And we do not have any financial interest in this presentation. To begin with, Sturge-Weber syndrome is a genetic mutation, and one of the main clinical features of this syndrome is congenital glaucoma. However, there can be involvement of the anterior as well as the posterior segment of the eye. So, coming to the clinical scenario, we had this one 8-year-old boy who presented to the IOPD with clinical features of headache, diminution of vision, and pain around the right eye for 1 month. He was already an established case of Sturge-Weber syndrome, and he also had the history of trabeculotomy at 6 months of age. On clinical presentation, we could notice a port-wine stain that was present on the right side of the face and the neck, and it was present since birth. On clinical examination, the best corrected visual acuity of the right side was 6/60. Ocular melanosis was noted along with presence of aberrant episcleral vessels on the right eye. The cornea was edematous with intraocular pressure, with rise of intraocular pressure, which was 42 millimeter of mercury. On fundus examination, we could notice a choroidal hemangioma, and a narrow angle was detected on gonioscopy. So the patient was planned for several investigations. The ultrasound B scan of the right eye was normal. The chest X-ray did not reveal any obvious abnormality. However, the echocardiography showed ventricular septal defect. To rule out any neurological involvement, EEG was done, but the EEG record was normal. CT changes, as well as there was presence of focal calcification, which was synonymous with the findings of Sturge-Weber syndrome. Also in the MRI brain, that was suggestive of leptomeningeal angioma. So we had the port-wine stain, we had this choroidal hemangioma, as well as leptomeningeal angioma. And hence, it establishes the diagnosis of Sturge-Weber syndrome. Finally, the patient was planned for additional surgery, as the trabeculotomy that was done at 6 months of age failed to control the intraocular pressure. Initially, the patient was given topical beta blockers, but that failed to control the intraocular pressure. So under cover of the beta blocker, we went for posterior sclerotomy as well as trabeculectomy of the right eye under general anesthesia, following which the child was apparently doing well and intraocular pressure was controlled. So coming to the discussion, Sturge-Weber syndrome is a rare genetic disorder with an incidence of 1 per 50,000, where the association with glaucoma is 30 to 70% of cases. However, the treatment is challenging because of its early onset, severe visual field impairment at the time of presentation, and the unresponsiveness of the patients to standard medical treatment. Also, the success rate of the surgeries are very low in cases of Sturge-Weber syndrome. Primarily, we always go for a procedure like goniotomy or trabeculotomy, but additionally, the patient requires other surgery like filtering surgeries or valve implantation for long-term control of intraocular pressure. So to conclude, in this, the purpose of presenting the study is to discuss the role of posterior sclerotomy, trabeculectomy under the cover of topical beta blocker to control repeated attacks of childhood glaucoma in Sturge-Weber syndrome. These are my references. Thank you.
Well presented, Dr. Lakkar. I would request the panelists to question Dr. Lakkar.
Is there any role of oral beta blockers in the hemangiomas?
Studies have shown that even medical therapy do not show much.
No. My question was like when we're planning a surgery in these cases, there's a lot of risk of having a choroidal bleed.
Yes, sir,
because of the choroidal
choroidal
hemangioma.
Yes,
so
sir.
do we give oral beta blockers to sometimes kind of prevent having these
Yes, sir, that
suprachoroidal
may be
hemorrhages?
given. So that may be
Yes,
given.
so that may be given.
Yes,
Given. So we did not use that kind of thing in this patient.
No, sir.
So Sturge-Weber definitely is one of the difficult forms of glaucomas, but yes, oral beta blockers can also be used to kind of limit the bleed, and definitely a surgery is required in these cases.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else with any more questions? Okay, so coming to Dr. Shobik Barua, are you ready?
That was very intelligent move. Till then, you were asking questions. Dr. Shobik shared his presentation. So I request all the speakers, please do this same thing.
Yeah, I think the next one, I think Dr. Sudipta, you can ask the next one to be ready.
Yes. It's Dr. Lakshmi Mai Bepi. Are you here? No response. So Dr. Raki P. D. Cruz, kindly be ready with your presentation.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay.
Can I start, ma'am?
Yes, Dr. Shobik, please start.
Thank you so much, ma'am. A very warm good morning to one and all. I am going to discuss a role of freshly prepared amniotic membrane graft for a case of symblepharon which was managed in our institute. We don't have any direct or indirect financial interest in this presentation. So now coming to the introduction, we all know amniotic membrane is the inner layer of fecal membrane that is composed of 3 distinct layers. It has been used in ophthalmology since time immemorial. The first use was done by D. Roth in 1940, and these are some of the indications of amniotic membrane graft transplantation. And some of them are cicatricial, pemphigoid, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, and pterygium. Also done in my case, it's a case of symblepharon where this was done. So symblepharon is defined as a partial or complete adhesion of the palpebral conjunctiva of the eyelid with the bulbar conjunctiva of the eyeball. Coming to the history proper, the patient who happens to be a 50-year-old male hailing from Arunachal Pradesh presented with complaints of inability to open both eyes for last 20 days. It was associated with pain, which was inside was in onset and was gradually progressive. It was associated with discharge, which was thick and yellowish since last 2 months, and there is history of sticking together of the lid margins for last 20 days. The patient doesn't give any history of oral or genital ulceration. Coming to examination, there was no obvious abnormality noticed in general examination. However, the head posture was found to be slightly tilted upwards, and the eyebrows were found to be raised in local examination. On ocular examination, the findings of right eye and left eye were found to be quite similar. The eyelids were thick and edematous hyperemic, and additions were noted in both upper and lower lid at the medial and lateral cornices. The palpebral aperture was found to be narrow, and it was measured to be 3 mm vertically in both the eyes. The extraocular movements were found to be restricted in all quadrants due to the adhesions. Routine blood investigation and other investigation was done, which revealed of this abnormality. Conjunctival swab was sent to the Department of Microbiology, which revealed a picture suggestive of Staphylococcus aureus. So based upon this clinical and diagnostic workup, we can come to a provisional diagnosis of scleral symblepharon, most probably due to membranous conjunctivitis. The patient was taken up for management, and initially he was managed conservatively using antibiotic and lubricating eye drops. Then he was planned for freshly prepared amniotic membrane transplantation. Amniotic membrane was obtained freshly under sterile conditions from a human placenta, which was obtained shortly after elective cesarean section. Then it was prepared after washing it with balanced saline solution containing specified doses of penicillin, streptomycin, amphotericin B, and neomycin. Then surgery was done. The normal steps were done, like the adequate exposure was first given. Then ocular surface reconstruction was done by the amniotic membrane to cover the Barrett's sclera, to reform the fornix, and to cover the denuded palpebral conjunctiva. Post-operatively, the patient received topical antibiotic and steroid combination, which was tapered over the weeks, and patient did very well. Healing was confirmed using fluorescence staining, and these are some of the post-operative photographs. And on day 8, we can see the patient was doing very well. Now coming to the discussion, we all know Streptococcus pyogenes and cornicobacterium diphtheria happens to be the most common causes of membranous conjunctivitis, which is seen commonly in the adult population. To manage a case of symblepharon, freshly prepared amniotic membrane has got many benefits, like it's cost effective, then it's easily available, because other forms like the cryopreserved amniotic membrane becomes very costly and it cannot be afforded by many patients. There are some other materials that can be used, like conjunctival autograft, mucous membrane grafts, etc., but it's very cumbersome to prepare those grafts. So I believe in a case of symblepharon, conjunctival, freshly prepared amniotic membrane plays a very important role. These are my references that I have used for making this presentation. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Shobik. An excellent presentation. Any question from the panelists, please?
How did you ensure that it was did you do any serum staining, like there was no HIV or HSV?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Actually, before taking up the patient for surgery, we went to the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. After taking an informed consent from the patient party, that means the donor, the mother of the baby, informed consent was taken. And before that also, the patient was taken up for this routine serological investigation, because nowadays for every cesarean section, all the viral markers are tested and it came out to be negative. After that only we took up to the placenta and we prepared this graft.
Fine. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any more questions from anybody? Then we'll go on to the next speaker, Dr. Rakhi.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Dr. Rakhi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please
We
unmute.
can't hear you. Yeah, we can't hear you, Dr. Rakhi.
Dr. Rakhi, please unmute.
Dr. Rakhi,
Yeah.
we can't hear you.
Are my slides visible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I would request our next speaker, Dr. Upali, if you're ready.
Can I start?
Yes.
Okay.
Am I in or out? I am not in the panel.
Is this Dr. Naredi, right?
Dr. Naredi.
So what is my number then?
He can speak next.
Okay, ma'am.
Ma'am,
Dr.
can I
Rakhi,
start?
Dr. Rakhi, please start.
Yes. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Rakhi. I'll be presenting an interesting case of a cyst with a twist. So my objective is to report a rare case of internuclear ophthalmoplegia with Apgay's palsy caused by cysticercosis. So a 31-year-old young man presented to our OPD with complaints of acute onset of painless vertical diplopia for near as well as distant since 15 days. We did a complete ophthalmic evaluation including B-scan and MRI. So in the past, patient gives a history of sudden onset of right-sided headache radiating towards the neck 15 days back, following which he developed sudden loss of consciousness with seizures, for which he was hospitalized and was advised MRI. Following MRI, he was treated by a neurologist. Soon after regaining consciousness, the patient noticed that he was having this double vision. He is a vegetarian by diet. On examination, his visual acuity was 20/20 and 6. Ocular alignment will be described later. Remaining anterior and posterior segment and IOP all were normal.
So here we can see in the primary gaze, the patient had a 18 prism diopters of right exotropia with 14 prism diopters of left hypotropia. In the up case, there was elevation restriction in both the eyes. The extroversion was relatively normal, but on livoversion, there was an adduction deficit of -2 in right eye with a left eye abduction nystagmus, which was suggestive of internuclear ophthalmoplegia. MRI was available and it showed different multiple hyperintense lesions at different levels, like at the midbrain, at the thalamus, at the occipital lobes, which was showing contrast enhancement also. So we went ahead and did a B scan for this portion, and this showed hypoechoic spaces along the superior rectus muscles and the medial rectus muscle, which was suggestive of cyst. So then we made a provisional diagnosis of right internuclear ophthalmoplegia with upgaze palsy due to dorsal midbrain syndrome associated with neurocysticercosis and orbital cysticercosis affecting superior rectus and medial rectus muscle. We then asked the patient to review back with the neurologist with our reports, and after that the neurologist started the patient on albendazole, steroids and eptoin. 2 months later, he followed up with us, and that time the patient said that his diplopia has decreased markedly. He was orthotropic in primary gaze, but on further examination, there was a minimal exotropia and hypertropia remaining. Repeat B scan was done, which showed persistent cyst along the superior rectus muscle. So we discussed with the neurologist, and he said we will continue steroids and albendazole for a little more time. This was an MRI 2 months later, and it showed that all the cyst has completely resolved. All the cyst have completely resolved. So this cysticercosis is caused by Tinea solium. It is contracted by ingestion of undercooked pork and contaminated vegetables and food. Mainly affect the central nervous system. In the eye, it can affect the vitreous, the subretinal and subconjunctival areas mainly. Neurocysticercosis has long been recognized as a cause of pretectal and dorsal midbrain syndrome associated with cerebrovascular complication and internuclear ophthalmoplegia. Diagnosis is healthy, mainly aided by imaging techniques. Definitive diagnosis requires serology. Orbital cysts are best treated with a 4-week regimen of oral albendazole with steroids. Surgical removal is attempted only in subconjunctival and eyelid cysts. So in conclusion, cysticercosis can have a variety of presentation depending upon the site of lodgement and can mimic various neurological disorders. A basic knowledge and understanding of the disease coupled with a high index of suspicion and appropriate imaging is needed for diagnosis. All cases with orbital cysticercosis, a concurrent neurocysticercosis should be suspected and it should be ruled out. Thank you everyone for the patient here.
Thank you, Dr. Rakhi. Any questions to Dr. Rakhi from the panelist?
Dr. Rakhi, you had used the word up gaze restriction, and then we are talking about paralysis. Restriction typically means restrictive strabismus, not paralytic strabismus.
Yes.
So we should be using the word up gaze limitation.
Yes.
So limitation could be a restriction as well as paralysis.
Yes.
So restriction has to be used very restrictively.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So it's an interesting case. And I think it is difficult to delineate whether it was a superior rectus or a superior oblique cysticercus.
Yes.
So it can be there, in both the cases. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I think.
Doctor, on the MRI, she showed in the superior rectus, no?
Was it? I think missed the MRI
No.
then.
Yeah, she showed in the MRI. It was the
Okay.
cyst in the superior rectus and medial rectus.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Dr.
thank you.
Naredi, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Please share your screen.
I just want to share my, yes, I'm sharing my screen. Yeah, is it now visible?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah,
Yes.
please.
My screen is visible?
Yes.
Okay, I will start my slideshow. Thank you, ma'am. My topic for today's talk is Charles-Bonnet syndrome and financial the history dates back to 1760, first described by Charles Bonnet in 1760. In 1967, French-Swiss neurologist Georges de Montpensier coined the term Charles-Bonnet syndrome in Bonnet's honor, and Charles-Bonnet syndrome was first introduced in psychiatry in 1982, and there was a they believed that the visual hallucinations are often type persistent and repetitive in nature, and it is reported incidence of non-reporting of this disorder is the greatest hindrance to determining the exact prevalence. In our Indian scenario, we also do not know what is the prevalence of the disease. And this is a flow chart for Charles-Bonnet syndrome, and the highly unreported and often misdiagnosed condition affect how the brain processes visual information, which causes people to see things that aren't real. The studies show as little as 1% of sufferers admit to have experiencing the hallucinations, and it was first reported 250 years back by naturalist Charles Bonnet. And hallucination can last for seconds to a day. Hallucination examples, they are simple or complex hallucinations, and complex example complex of complex hallucination, room morphing into a war zone. And simple hallucination is like seeing animals and tiger, like a tiger or some other animals also. And simple hallucination is Lilliputian size people in Tyrolean costume, and complex hallucination is sinister figure in the house. And simple hallucinations may be observed in terms of the children playing in the park, and there may be some more animals in the ground and like that. And there is a very less reported number of patients of this Charles-Bonnet syndrome, and like that the world the prevalence around the world is ranging from 1 to 40%, and it is very high prevalence, but least noted by us, because the hallucination syndrome is now not discussed by the clinicians also. Without visual, the mechanism of this visual hallucination is without visual data coming in through the eyes, the brain brain feels the void and makes up images or recalls the stored images for you to see, and that is what causes the visual hallucinations of Charles-Bonnet syndrome. CBS predominantly affect people with visual impairment due to age-related macular degeneration, glaucoma, or diabetic retinopathy, or the damages to the eye or optic pathway. Their visual system doesn't process new image. In particular, central vision loss due to the conditions such as macular degeneration combined with peripheral vision loss from glaucoma, bilateral optic nerve damage due to methyl alcohol poisoning may predispose to Charles-Bonnet syndrome. Although most people with such deficit do not develop the syndrome. Symptoms. The main symptom of Charles-Bonnet syndrome is having visual hallucinations. Most people have them when they wake up. It is must that the eyes are open. Dots are the geometric shapes, landscapes such as mountains, waterfalls, people, animal, or insect. People dressed in costumes from an earlier time, imaginary creatures like dragons. The hallucination may move or remain still. They can appear in black and white or color. The length of hallucination can last seconds, minutes, or hours. There is no special test to find out if the patient is having Charles-Bonnet syndrome. The doctor will talk to patient about the medical history, try to rule out any other source of visual hallucinations, including mental health problems like schizophrenia, dementia, or Parkinson's disease. Whether you take certain medications like LSD or something. Charles-Bonnet syndrome should receive basic laboratory tests such as a metabolic panel and complete blood count, along with a neuroimaging, typically with CT without contrast, or functional MRI could be considered. This is a very interesting the slide of functional MRI. In the Charles-Bonnet syndrome,
Sir, please conclude your presentation.
you can see the
Your 4 minutes are over, doctor.
Okay, ma'am. There is no cure or effective treatment, but there is only you have to reassure the patient that he is not a crazy, and he do not. It is going to disappear after 2 years of timing. This doesn't last for lifetime, and you can change the environment. Hallucination happen more in dim lighting or brightly lit room. Change the lighting condition may reduce hallucination, and patient can distract move their eyes from away from the hallucination, look away from the hallucination, stare at the hallucination, close your eyes, then open them, rest and relaxation, reduce anxiety, and interrupting vision for the short time by closing the eyes, blinking is something helpful. And over the time, more you see the hallucination.
I think, sir, you'll have to finish it up because we have a lot of.
Doctor, kindly conclude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just finish it up. CVS tend to appear weeks or months after patients start experiencing worsening of vision, and there is no definite test to diagnose CBS. It is the properly taken history which gives you the insight into the problem, and condition require reassurance, change in lifestyle. In most cases, hallucination slows down considerably or stops after 1 or 2 years. Now we have latest the stimulation of cortical areas to dampen down the cortical.
Dr. Naredi, we need to cut you short here. Thank you for your presentation. I would request our next speaker, Dr. Upali, to please share her screen. Dr. Upali, are you there?
Yeah, doctor, she is here.
Okay. Please share your screen kindly.
Next, Dr. Chiranjeev, please be ready. Yeah, Dr. Upali, we can see your screen.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. Sir, can you see my screen?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm Dr. Upali Tiwari, and I'm presenting a case of angle-closure glaucoma with diabetes, a dual challenge. Sorry, I'm not able to move my slides.
Just put a single click on the slide anywhere, and then
you can use a slide sorter to just move forward.
Yeah, it's going now.
Can you full screen, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Glaucoma is one of the leading cause of irreversible blindness worldwide. It's the second most common cause of blindness after cataract. 1/3 of total glaucoma populations are from primary angle closure glaucoma. It's a group of disease in which there are reversible or adhesional closure of the anterior chamber angle. The angle closure may occur in an acute or chronic form. We had a chronic form which may develop after acute angle closure, where synuclear closure of the angle persists, or it may develop over time as the angle closes from repeated contact between the peripheral iris and trabecular mass rug, which often leads to peripheral anterior synechiae. We have neovascular glaucoma. It's a sight-threatening secondary glaucoma characterized by appearance of the new vessels over the iris and proliferation of the fibrovascular tissue in the anterior chamber angle. Retinal ischemia is one of the most common driving factor for neovascularization, and the common causes are CRVO and PDR. The current rise in the prevalence of neovascular glaucoma is mainly related to increased diabetes mellitus cases nowadays. I had a patient of 60 years, female. Patient came with a complaint of ocular pain, redness, and diminution of vision in left eye since 15 days. According to the patient, she was apparently all right 6 years back when she developed diminution of vision in both eye. In left eye, the diminution of vision was mildly painful, associated with redness and watering, headache, and she has had multiple episodes of the same complaint. In right eye, diminution of vision was sudden in onset, painful in nature, associated with redness, watering, and floaters. She had multiple episodes of same associated with headache and vomiting also. She has history of right eye trabeculectomy by documents 2 years back, and history of left eye cataract surgery and with intravitreal injection 4 months back. She was using eye drops, brimonidine and timolol combination and dorzolamide when she came to the hospital. And she was a known case of diabetes mellitus type 2 and systemic hypertension, for which she was taking medications. In the ocular examination in right eye, the vision was with no perception of light. Conjunctival congestion was present with a well-formed bleb suggesting trabeculectomy. Cornea was clear, anterior chamber was shallow with VH grade 1. Iris color was normal, pattern was disturbed, and posterior synechiae were present in the eye. Hyperpigmented patch was present in inferior temporal quadrant of the iris. Pupil center and not reacting to light. Cataract was the lens is cataract, NS grade 2, and the NCT was raised 24.7 mm Hg. And in left eye, vision was PL positive and PR accurate. Conjunctiva was congested, cornea was clear, anterior chamber was shallow, VH grade 1, and in the pupillary margin, vascularization was present in the iris and it was extending up to the periphery. There was also ectropion uvea was present in the iris. Pupil was also central and not reacting to light. Shining reflex was present, indicating pseudophakia, and distal pressure was raised, but NCT was not non-recordable. In the fundus, the patient didn't comply to the fundus picture because she was already in very much pain when she came. So we took the liberty to draw the fundus. The media in right eye, the media was mild hazy due to lens opacity. There was vitreoretinal traction bands associated with slight vitreous degeneration present. Disc margin was distinct and circular. CDR was 0.9:1, and the blood vessels in the veins were dilated and tortuous. Foveal reflex was not appreciable. In the general fundus, we had vitreoretinal fibrovascular traction bands present in the supratemporal and supranasal quadrant. In the left eye fundus, the media was clear, disc margin was distinct, and neovascularization was present in the temporal margin of the disc. And CDR was 0.8:1. Foveal reflex was not appreciable. In general fundus, there were multiple flame-shaped hemorrhages present in all the 4 quadrants, and there was a neovascularization tuft present infero-temporally, which suggested CRBO. My provisional diagnosis was right eye proliferative diabetic retinopathy with angle closure glaucoma, glaucomatous optic neuropathy with NS grade 2 cataract. In the left eye, CRBO, neovascular glaucoma, and glaucomatous optic neuropathy with pseudophakia. We did the investigation. We couldn't do the FFA.
Dr. Rupali, we need to conclude your talk. Is there any questions for Dr. Rupali based on differential diagnosis?
Dr. Upali, why was the NCT used for measuring the pressure? Any specific reason?
Sir, because the patient was not complying to another form of the other form of management of IOP because she was in pain, so she didn't comply to Shiodes or anything else.
Okay.
Do you do applanation?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you do applanation? Actually, if you're presenting in a forum, NCT is not the one that you should be using.
Yes,
and when you are presenting a small suggestion, you don't have to go on with the history so much. And what was the basic reason for you to be presenting this case?
My basic reason was presenting this case because I found it very compelling because she already had angle closure glaucoma beforehand, before the diabetic part, and she got in the right, she already had proliferative diabetic retinopathy. She has no vision. She has already glaucomatous damage all over in the right eye, and she just had done cataract surgery 4 months back. And after the cataract surgery, most probably the neovascularization developed, and neovascular glaucoma in the left eye then developed in the eye. That's why I found the case compelling to present, ma'am. I'm sorry, it was not well versed.
Please do a proper workup when you are presenting.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
and you don't need to go on, and your slides should be also more succinct rather than giving a text and prose. Thank you. All the best.
Next speaker is Dr. Chiranjeev Singh. Are you ready? If you aren't ready.
Can you please unmute, doctor?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, sir. Good morning to all. Are the slides visible, sir?
You have to share it again. You stopped sharing. Please share it again.
So now, sir?
Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah, it's visible now. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning to all. Thanks, AOS, for giving us the opportunity to present a case. Here I report a case, a patient coming with an open angle glaucoma following a surgery. So basically, in an introduction, as we know, the secondary open angle closure following surgery is more common, while open angle incidence is higher in after vitrectomy surgeries. In a pathophysiology, as we know, the ciliary body, due to the impaired venous drainage, following the congestion and the swelling of the ciliary body happens, it rotates the anteriorly and causes the shift of the lens iris diaphragm, resulting in angle closure. In our case, we reported a patient who came us to as a follow-up patient who was operated in November, 3 months before presenting to the OPD. He was left by post-scleral buckling and Duras laser done for inferior rhegumatogenous RD done. There was also a history of LASIK 3 years back done. As the patient was a Navy guy, before joining to the Navy forces, he had undergone a LASIK surgery. So he had a for the LASIK was done for the correction of minus 3.5 diopter number, but there was no history of any redness or congestion or any other problem. Similarly, the anterior segment showed normal, but in the left eye, the IOP was raised. When the gonioscopy was done for this patient, it showed irregular widening of the ciliary body bands in the inferior nasal as well as the temporal quadrants, suggestive of an angle recession. After the anterior segment, the fundus was evaluated since it showed gonioscopy revealed an angle recession, but the cup here was normal, 0.3, with vessels also healthy and NRR also healthy. So the diagnosis was made of a right eye normal with status post LASIK, while the left eye with the angle recession glaucoma with status post scleral buckling with the Braz laser and LASIK. And the visual fields were also done, which revealed normal. The fundus picture was similar to this, with the barrage done in the inferior quadrant, temporal quadrant. In addition, it shows little lattice degeneration also. The following which the patient was started on timolol and periodic, it was told to advise a intraocular evaluation and fundus to be done. Basically, this case report I wanted to discuss is that post retinal detachment as well as in retinal detachment surgeries, there's an increased risk of open angle as well as angle closure glaucoma. Usually, scleral buckling surgery, angle closure is more common. But here we got an angle recession glaucoma, basically open angle following a surgery. So basically, my study case report want to suggest that patients should always be advised for a frequent follow-up as well as to detect the early diagnosis and timely treatment. So the angle recession here can be earlier stage can be managed at the level of medical treatment only. Here are my references. Thank you all.
Thank you, doctor. You said that the glaucoma is related post-surgery, but but most probably it is due to the angle recession. Angle recession glaucoma can manifest immediately or sometimes at a later part of time also.
Yes.
So you cannot say it's a post-surgical glaucoma. That is what I feel.
Okay.
And like you said correctly, that angle closure glaucoma can occur post buckling, but that is usually in the early stages.
Yes,
because of the venous stasis and effusion.
Yes, sir.
So that's what I thought. But good, well documented.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that it is already a pre-existing angle recession. Was Diamox used to control the IOP preoperatively?
No, sir. Pre-op was IOP was normal, sir. It was not raised, sir. Post-op only.
So only after the because you showed the table which would look like a pre-operative thing. The pressure of 30 was only after the surgery.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. After follow-up,
okay.
Sir.
Because my intent was that Diamox can also sometimes cause this
rotation,
ciliary body effusion and rotation of the ciliary body.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And doctor, did you mention about the visual CD ratio or the visual fields?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Cup disc ratio was 0.3 only, ma'am. With NNR healthy, ma'am. And visual fields was also done with 24:2 setting, ma'am, which revealed normal visual fields, ma'am.
So it could just be, and post-surgery, you would have given us a steroid also, no?
Yes, ma'am. Generally, post-surgery it was given, but still after the duration of 3 months, it had a, we were about to stop the medication for anti-glaucoma, it had a raised IOP, ma'am. So
Fine.
that's why it was suspected.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Chiranjeev. Well presented. Now I'd request Dr. Deepayan Sarkar to kindly present your case. Dr. Deepayan.
Dr. Deepayan, can you please unmute?
Yeah, we can see your slides. I think.
Let me send him a message to unmute. Yeah, Dr. Deepayan, please speak.
Good morning, all. Topic for my today's presentation is unusual presentation of a case of uveal melanoma managed successfully at a tertiary care center. I have no financial disclosures. A 66-year-old female of Indian origin presented with left-sided headache for 7 months, left eye pain for 1 month, dimness of vision in left eye for 1 month. She was a known hypertensive for 5 years and was controlled under medication. She had left-sided severe throbbing headache for 7 months with waxing waning course, not relieved on analgesics. Investigations done by general medicine failed to establish the etiology of headache. The patient started having left eye pain, which was dull, boring in nature, and gradual dimness of vision for the last 1 month. The vision decreased to PL negative in the left eye in 20 days. The patient consulted ophthalmology after complete loss of vision in the left eye. On examination, the lid adnexa, cornea, and anterior chamber were found to be common damage in both the eyes. The iris in the left eye showed NVIs in the inferior 5 to 7 o'clock position. There was NS grade 2 cataract in both the eyes, but there was no NVAs on gonioscopy. The IOP was normal in both the eyes. Ocular movements were full, smooth, and painless in all directions. The fundus revealed a brownish black pigmented homogeneous uniform dome-shaped mass array originating from the nasal side of the retina and extending in the vitreous cavity, crossing the pupillary aperture and extending up to the temporal side. There was no view of the macula and optic disc. The USG-B scan was done. It showed an homogeneous mass originating from the nasal aspect. The mass was had an acoustically silent zone, and there was presence of choroidal excavation with an acoustic shadow in the orbit. The mass showed a typical cholestered appearance. On Doppler imaging, the tumor was found to be vascular. The MRI showed the mass as an homogeneously hyperintense in T1 weighted image, as hypointense in T2 weighted image, and as a hypointense on fat suppression image also. There was no extension of the mass beyond the globe. The investigations were done to look for metastasis. There was no metastatic lesion found on the investigations. The mass was confirmed as a choroidal melanoma of the left eye. Treatment was the left eye enucleation with a PMMA implant performed under LA with the HP sample sent. HP showed this picture, which is of a polygonal cell with abundant eosinophilic cytoplasm with distinct cell borders, large nucleoli, and conspicuous nucleoli, which is suggestive of a epithelial cell type of choroidal melanoma. The most common symptoms of choroidal melanoma are asymptomatic with flushes, floaters, dimness of vision, pain, and symptom of METS. Study conducted by P. Rishi et al. Had shown headache as a presenting feature of choroidal melanoma in less than 1% of individuals. Pathophysiology of headache has been described as angle closure glaucoma and spontaneous tumor necrosis. In our case, patient had left-sided headache for 5 months. The cause of headache was initially not attributed to ocular etiology because of no ocular complaints. This is because headache is rare and unusual clinical symptom of presentation of choroidal melanoma. Histopathologically, epithelioid type is the most aggressive and fast progressing variant with higher chances of tumor metastasis and tumor necrosis. HP in our case revealed epithelioid variant. Take home message for our from my session is choroidal melanoma is relatively rare in Indian population, and headache is an unusual presenting symptom. A clinician should be aware of such presentation and should evaluate promptly for ocular etiologies and tumor. Choroidal tumors can be aggressive and cause metastatic lesions, endangering life of the patient. Proper evaluation, multi-department consultation, and wise decision should be taken before planning conservative management. In aggressive tumors, it is prudent to perform timely enucleation to preserve life of the patient. Thank you.
What was the IOP for the patient in the PL negative eye?
Ma'am, 16 and 20 mm of HG. In the PL negative, it was 20 mm of HG.
She did not give any history of red eye in the preceding time?
No, ma'am. She just had a history of headache, chronic headache for last 7 months, and then she started having pain in the left eye for last 1 month, and the vision deteriorated to PL negative within next 20 days. This was the only feature of the patient.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deepan. I would request Dr. Darshani Maria to please share his screen. Dr. Darshani.
Hello.
Yes.
Good morning, ma'am.
Please share your screen.
I have already shared, ma'am. Is it visible?
Not visible at all.
No, it's not visible, Dr. Darshani. Please stop and share it again.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Yeah, now we can see. It's coming up.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My topic for today's presentation is clinical study of prevalence of hypertension in glaucoma patients. So I have no financial interest or relationship to enclose. Glaucoma is the world's second most common cause of blindness. As we all know, it accounts for almost 15% of global blindness. India accounts for 12.9% of the world's primary open-angle glaucoma blindness. Now, early diagnosis and careful management can prevent blindness occurring from glaucoma. A variety of studies have shown that intraocular pressure is associated with systemic blood pressure. So few of them I'll quote. According to Beaver Dam Eye study, the variability is in systolic blood pressure result in change in the aqueous humor formation, which lead to increased IOP. POAG is a multiple optic neuropathy factor characterized by changes in the head of the atropic optic nerve with visual field loss associated. The impact of blood pressure on POAG has been altered by the age, with a stronger correlation with subjects in the older age group. Now, 24-hour blood pressure tracking has also been tried, and it indicated that there is a higher risk of POAG in patients with significant drop in their blood pressure overnight. So, what are the aim of my study? Aim of my study was clinical study of prevalence of hypertension in glaucoma patient. Objective of these studies were to know the prevalence of hypertension in already diagnosed patient of glaucoma, to know the association of glaucoma and hypertension, to check the diabetes, mellitus, and myopia association with glaucoma, to calculate male and female ratio in correlation of hypertension and glaucoma. Materials and methods. Study setting, Department of Ophthalmology, Santosh Medical College and Hospital. Study design, cross-sectional observational study. Patient age group was taken more than 40 years of age. Sample size was taken 114. So we collected the data manually and statistically, and analysis was performed using MS Excel and SPSS version 24. What are the inclusion criteria? All diagnosed cases of POAG above 40 years of age presenting to ophthalmology OPD at Santosh Medical College. Exclusion criteria: diagnosed cases of hypertension and age below 40 years. So results. According to results, 57% patients were found to be hypertensive when taken their blood pressure, as patients were coming to their routine checkup. So we were just following them, like we were following up for them for their routine investigation, and at that time also we took the blood pressure simultaneously. And also now age-wise distribution, like we find out that 40 to 49 years of age group has highest number of patients who were having blood pressure, who were having hypertension. Male and female ratio: male has more prevalence rate than female. Okay, and relationship with diabetes mellitus, number of POAG patients with diabetes was found out to be 31, and POAG patients without diabetes mellitus were 83. Myopia was found to be 5.2% in all our hypertensive patients. Discussion. In our sample, 6 out of 114 patients had myopia, 5.2%, and there was no significant correlation with POAG, which is close to the result in the population-based study by Vijaya et al. Myopia had a statistically significant association with POAG in the Arvind Eye survey. In the Blue Mountain Eye report, myopic subject had a double to triple increased risk of glaucoma compared with non-myopic subject, and the risk was independent of other risk factors for glaucoma and IOP. So the correlation between diabetes and POAG showed a trend towards significance, and effect persisted even on multivariate analysis, which was similar to finding of the Beaver Dam study. The Blue Mountain Eye study endorsed the link between diabetes and POAG, although no correlation was found between POAG and diabetes and Arvind Eye survey. Even in the Baltimore Eye survey indicated it was not linked to diabetes and POAG. In our sample study, there was no statistically significant association between systemic hypertension and incidence of POAG, which is consistent with the result from Barmoda's studies, eye study, and the V et al. Study. This was contrary to some population-based research, such as the 11th Blue Mountain Eye study, the 15th Egna Newmark study, and 47 Baltimore Eye study. There was also no major gender difference between patient with and without POAG in population-based study conducted in rural and urban South India and Central India. The study of the Blue Mountain study disease showed a higher prevalence of POAG in women than in men, and similar results were seen in the study of Andhra Pradesh eye studies.
Gentle reminder, doctor, time is up.
Oh, okay. In our so, sir, should I continue? I'll just conclude with the conclusion, sir.
Yeah, I think you can conclude. Yeah.
Yeah. This was a cross-sectional study conducted among patients with primary open-angle glaucoma visiting the outpatient department of Santosh Medical College. A total of 114 patients with POAG were evaluated for concurrent presence of systemic hypertension. 114 patients, 73 were males and 41 females. Systemic
I think you
hypertension
already
was...
said all this, doctor. Just say the last thing. You already said that in this slide.
Sum it up in one sentence.
According to my study, ma'am, like systemic hypertension was not that much relevant to glaucoma patient, already diagnosed glaucoma patient. So it was around 57.9%. It was not that much significant.
Dr. Darshini, this was your thesis presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Please, when you next time when you present, sorry to be telling you this, but your topic is on systemic hypertension and POAG.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And it was already in patients who are already established POAG. That's right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we were finding.
So if you have already established, it's not incidence. Incidence of POAG is in people who, in a general population, where you suddenly find them to be glaucomatous. Here you have taken patients who were already glaucomatous.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That was the part.
The criteria is not right. And for you to bring in myopia and diabetes, it confuses the whole picture. You could have just stuck to hypertension and taken the diastolic blood pressure relationship. You could have taken, tried to calculate ocular perfusion pressure. It would have been much more in the study. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
I guess Dr. Ishita has started sharing her screen. So I would request Dr. Ishita to please present. And Dr. Manpreet Kaur, you would be the next speaker. So please be ready.
Dr. Ishita, can you hear us?
Good morning, sir. Good morning, panelist.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Am I present?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. Sorry. Today I'm presenting a case report on conjunctival malignant melanoma. Sorry, my slides are not moving. One second.
Just have one single click on anywhere of the slide.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, it's going now.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The purpose of this presentation was to report a rare case of conjunctival malignant melanoma and its treatment outcome. So conjunctival malignant melanoma, I'll be abbreviating as CMM. It is a rare but potentially life-threatening cancerous growth of the eye. It arises from the melanocytes amongst the basal cells of the conjunctival epithelium. It's quite an uncommon tumor and comprises of 2% of all the eye tumors and 5% of the melanomas in ocular region and 0.25% of melanomas overall. So the overall incidence is quite rare. It's 0.24 to 0.8 cases per million. Usually it is first identified clinically around puberty or earlier adulthood, and it can arise in any region of conjunctiva, and most commonly the perilimbal bulbar conjunctiva. But in rare cases, it can extend into globe and orbit also. So clinical metastasis usually occurs first to the lymph nodes, that is the preauricular and the mandibular lymph nodes in about 45 to 60% cases with regional metastasis. So tissues most commonly affected by metastasis are lung, liver, brain, skin, and bone. Here I'm presenting a case of a 29-year-old male who presented with swelling in the left eye near the medial canthus since 7 years. So this swelling suddenly, it was initially a pinhead size and it progressed to the current size, which I'll be showing in the next picture. It was painless and there was no sudden change in the size or the color. So the associated complaints of this patient was continuous redness and watering and intermittently since 3 months, and it was not responsive to any treatment. He didn't present with any history of anorexia or weight loss. The patient was moderately built and nourished and conscious to time, place, and person, very well cooperative, and no other systemic abnormality found other than the hyperpigmented plaques and macules that were seen on the left lateral aspect of neck, clavicle, forearm, and palms. Head posture was erect, ocular posture was asymmetrical. As we can see, there is exotropia here and due to mechanical restriction. Visual axes were not parallel and facial symmetry was symmetrical. So levo elevation, depression were restricted, and there was, there were restriction in the movement. On anterior segment, there was a 4.4 to 4.4 by 5.6 millimeters of single black colored mass that was noted arising from the bulbar conjunctiva to the medial canthus. Medial to the medial canthus, it was firm in consistency, not mobile. At irregular edges, no tenderness or pulsations were noted. Otherwise, the anterior segment was normal. So surgically, this patient was managed. There was left eye wide excision of the mass was done with clear margins, followed by a 360-degree cryoablation around the margins and the base of the lesion. This was followed by amniotic membrane graft that was done. All of this was done under local anesthesia. So the first picture shows the wide excision of the mass, and it was taken out in toto, followed by cryoablation of the clear margins and the base of the lesion. And this was followed by amniotic membrane grafting. So this patient was prescribed topical steroids and antibiotic combination, and the mass was sent for histopathology. This is the post-operative picture, and the mechanical restriction on the medial side was also reduced in the left eye. On histopathology, numerous melanophages and macrophages infiltrating 5 mm of substantia propria were noted. According to AJCC, that is American Joint Committee on Cancer Classification of the Conjunctival Malignant Melanoma, it was T2C, which is less than or equal to 1 quadrant and any caruncular involvement at all. So coming to the discussion, the CMM is a rare tumor with an increasing incidence. Thorough history should be performed and including details of sun exposure.
Hello. Madam, your time's up, madam. Please conclude the presentation.
Yes. In all cases should be referred to oncologist for detection of systemic metastasis. This patient was eventually also consulted on whether to note for any changes in the other plaques that were present on his body. Thank you.
Doctor, what would be the indications of exenteration for melanoma, conjunctival melanoma?
Ma'am, if it is involving the orbit, ma'am, then, and if it is local, if it is malignant, if it infiltrates the substantia propria, it can invade if it's affecting the vision, and if it is gone into the orbit, then we'll have to do the exenteration.
What is your follow-up on this case?
Ma'am, unfortunately, we were not able to follow up this patient after the initial first few weeks of follow-up. The graft was well accepted by the patient, but then the patient didn't show up.
The mass was not large enough to produce restriction, and it was not even adherent to the sclera.
Medially, it was restricted, ma'am.
But the post-surgery picture that you showed was at such an angle. That's not the way you should be taking pictures.
Yes, ma'am. We realized that later. Sorry, ma'am. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ishita. Before we go on to the next speaker, I will just call out the names who are left behind. Dr. Anurag Narula, Dr. Dipti Tiwari, Dr. Lakshmi Mai Beipi, Dr. Durga Subha, and Dr. Ramindra Singh. They have not responded. So we are on our last speaker, that is Dr. Manpreet Kaur.
And we have 15 minutes to go. Yeah, thank you.
And I think we can't see them also in the participants.
Yeah, I actually checked the participant list also. I didn't get them there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Manpreet, over to you.
Okay, ma'am. Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So my topic is pyogenic granuloma of conjunctiva, a case series. So pyogenic granuloma refers to a benign acquired.
Your PPT is not seen, Dr. Manpreet.
Okay, so I'm just.
Yes, doctor, can you please click on the share screen?
Yeah, sure. Is it visible now?
Yeah, it's visible now.
So pyogenic granuloma refers to a benign acquired vascular lesion commonly seen on the skin and mucosal surfaces. It is also called lobular capillary hemangioma. The term is a misnomer because the lesions are neither pyogenic nor granuloma. It is a fibrovascular response to a tissue insult such as surgical or non-surgical trauma or inflammation. It is most commonly seen after surgery for pterygium, squint, chalazion, or other spontaneously. The pathogenesis is thought to be secondary to local tissue hypoxia within the traumatized endothelial cells, which result in the expression of the growth factors such as vascular endothelial growth factor and basic fibroblast growth factor, leading to aberrant healing and growth. So the symptoms can be foreign body sensation, irritation, discharge, unsightly mass, and rarely pain. The granulomas are often friable and prone to bleeding after trivial trauma. On examination, it presents as an elevated fleshy red richly vascular mass, may be sessile or pedunculated with an underlying stalk. The surface may be smooth or rough and friable. The differential diagnosis ranges from squamous papillomas to malignant tumors like squamous cell carcinoma, melanotic melanoma, and Kaposi sarcoma. The management can be medical or surgical. Medical in the form of corticosteroids and timolol eye drops have been tested. And surgical is the excision followed by the cautery, and cryotherapy at the base is the most common practice, but recurrence is not rare. So I will present a series of 7 cases. So the first case is a 23 years old male presenting with a mass in the left upper tarsal conjunctiva. The second boy is 13 years old, and he had a history of a chalazion 3 months before the presentation. And this is thought to be because of the spontaneous rupture of the chalazion. And this third case is a female 30 years old presenting with the mass in the right upper tarsal conjunctiva, and we can see a fibrinoid necrosis. Case 4 is a 17-year-old male presenting with a mass in the left lower tarsal conjunctiva. He had a history of some accidental installation of some foreign body in the eye 1 month back, and after that he developed the symptoms and this rapidly growing mass. The case 5 is a girl, is a 9 years old girl. She had undergone symphylorectomy for her secondary to alkali burn. She had a pseudopterygium also. And after excision of this pseudopterygium and the symphylophron, she developed the pyogenic granuloma at the limbus on the superior nasal quadrant. And this is the slit lamp view of the pyogenic granuloma. Case 6 is a female, again 22 years old, and she presented with a mass on the bulbar conjunctiva just near the plica seminolaris. And case 7 was a female who was 60 years old and presented with the mass with a history of bleeding and growing mass from the last 1 year. So 1 month. So this slide summarizes the findings. So the age ranged from 9 years to 60 years. 4 were female and 3 were male. The duration ranged from 1 month to 3 months. The eye involved was left in 4 cases and right in 4 cases. And the lesions were mainly pedunculated only in the case 6, where it was sessile. And the size ranged from 3.3 millimeters up to 10 into 6 millimeters. And interesting finding is that there was no definitive history of trauma or surgery or inflammation in 4 cases, and only 3 cases had a positive history of chalazion, trauma, or surgery. So all the cases underwent excision under infiltration anesthesia, and cauterization was done at base, except case 5 with the girl who had symphylophron, and the tissues were sent for histopathological examination. Post-operative treatment was given in the form of antibiotic, steroid, and lubricating air drops with ointment at night. And follow-up was done at 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 6 months, and 1 year. And no recurrence was noted in any case. And this is the histopathological examination. So we can see here there is a capillary proliferation in a lobular pattern with mixed and acute and chronic inflammatory cells. The overlying epithelium is ulcerated at places. So these are the typical findings for a pyogenic granuloma. So coming to the discussion, pyogenic granulomas are also known as lobular capillary hemangiomas, and they represent benign acquired vascular tumors that usually follow an episode of inflammation such as surgery or trauma. Removal is indicated for cosmetic reasons if the granuloma becomes prone to bleeding or when the mass causes discomfort. Simple excision at the base of the lesion is the treatment of the choice, and pathological examination of the specimen after removal is recommended for definitive diagnosis and to exclude the presence of malignant tumors such as squamous cell carcinomas. And to conclude, pyogenic granulomas usually occur in response to trauma, maybe surgical or non-surgical, but may also occur without any predisposing factor, can occur in any age, and histopathological examination is useful in confirming the diagnosis and to rule out other differential diagnoses. So these are my references. Thank you.
Well presented, Dr. Manpreet. Any questions from the panelists?
It was a well presented series of cases. Yes.
Thank you.
So we were on the last speaker. So that ends our Hyde Park 3 session. Thank you to all participants, our panelists, our hosts, our co-host. Thank you for this lovely session. Anybody else wants to speak on this?
Thank you everybody for the participation, and I thank my co-panelists and thank the participants. And my request for the participants is like try to write it up and send it as a case report. Some of them presentations are very interesting, and that is the way we should not let it end at this point and try to go forward.
Agree with Dr. Neo, and interesting set of presentations. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was nice presentations. Some of them were really interesting. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, some of them were really very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you then.
Bye-bye. We have managed to give you more time.
Yes. Well managed, Sudipta.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
Sudipta.
Yeah.
Sudipta, well managed.
Yeah,
you,
I think starting the presentation in between discussions was a good idea, Dr. Sudeep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Sanjay. Well coordinated.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.